Hello again, and welcome back to What's Your Favorite Scary Story? We are on to episode number 3 now, and I know I've uploaded all of these 3 days in a row, but I just wanted to get some stuff out there and get the ball rolling as I started this thing off. But this will be the last episode I upload for the week, and going forward, I will be posting each episode every week on Wednesdays. So you can expect the 4th episode to come out on Wednesday, February 7th. Okay, let's get into today's topic. So today we are going to switch things up a little bit. We're kind of still talking about ghosts, but I would say this is more of an urban legend. Today's topic was suggested by my sister-in-law, Daisy, and it is the legend of La Llorona. This story has many different versions of its origin story. But mainly, it is traced back to Mexico, Latin America, and southern parts of the U.S. The earliest documentation of the story is from 1550 in Mexico City. So I'm going to go ahead and go over just some of the origin stories of La Llorona, which does translate into the weeping woman, for those of you who don't know. The most popular story is that of a beautiful young peasant woman named Maria, who married a wealthy man. They were happy together at first and had 2 children, but then her husband lost interest. One day, Maria was walking by a river with her kids and saw her husband riding in his carriage with a pretty young woman. Out of rage, she threw her kids in the river and drowned them out of revenge towards her husband. Once she snapped out of it, she realized what she had done and felt such immense grief that she spent the rest of her life wailing by the river in search of her children. In another version of this story, she drowned herself in the river immediately after her children. In an entirely different version, she had a drunken night out, and when she returned home, her children had drowned. She was cursed for her neglectfulness to search for them forever in her afterlife. Now, going back to what I mentioned about the Aztecs, she has allegedly been connected to the Aztecs as one of 10 omens predicting the conquest of Mexico, or as a fearsome goddess. One goddess mentioned is translated to snake woman. She has been described as, quote, a savage beast and evil omen who wears white, walks about at night, and constantly cries. Another goddess translates to the jade-skirted one, who oversaw the waters and was greatly feared because she would allegedly drown people. The Aztecs actually sacrificed children to honor her. Another story references the arrival of the Spanish in America in the 16th century. In this version, the woman was called La Malinche, a native woman who was an interpreter, guide, and eventually a mistress to Hernán Cortés during his conquest of Mexico. The conquistador left her after she gave birth to his child and married a Spanish woman instead. Supposedly, she was then despised by her own people and then murdered the child of Cortés out of revenge. Now, La Malinche was actually a real person, so I want to say there is no real evidence that she killed her child or was exiled by her people. So those are all the backstories that I'm going to talk about. This story really just has too many potential origins to list. But regardless of where anyone believes this legend comes from, it is a popular cautionary tale that Mexican and Latin parents tend to tell their children. They tell them that if they misbehave or wander off, La Llorona will come and take them. The story goes that she roams around by water, weeping loudly and looking for her children. Since she cannot ever find her own kids, it is said that she is either just looking for any children to help with the pain of missing her own, or she is trying to take other children's lives in place of her own children's so that they can live again. So that is the history of the folktale of La Llorona. But to some, she is much more than just an urban legend. There have been many sightings of her, and she is said to always be wearing a white dress and has extremely long, jet black hair falling over her face. She is usually seen at night, standing near the edge of the woods, trying to lure in children, even sometimes making them false promises to get them to go with her through the trees into their watery graves. I'm going to tell you a few stories of people's personal encounters with La Llorona. This first story took place in El Salvador and was posted on Reddit by the woman's granddaughter, so I'm going to be using a direct quote. All right, here we go. My grandma one day was supposed to meet up with a friend to go to another friend's wake. My grandma was waiting for her friend where they agreed to meet, which happened to be near a river. She sees this woman from far away, all in white, and my grandma said it looked just like her friend. She followed her by the river and kept calling out for her, but no answer. It started getting creepy when this woman was going towards these trees. My grandmother started catching up, but as she was getting closer to her, she started to feel her shoulders were big, her head felt big, and she couldn't move anymore. She was close enough to see this woman's face that was covered by a veil, and she said the woman's face was a skull. My grandma somehow came out of her shock and ran as fast as she could. She said she felt as if she was running slow and wasn't getting away fast enough. So that's where the story ends. The woman that posted it said her grandma did tell her about it, so I'm assuming she made it away okay. All right, so this next story takes place in El Paso, Texas in the 90s. The person in this story was about 11 years old when this took place. He had fallen asleep on the couch watching TV and was awoken at 4 a.m. by screaming coming from outside the house. He could tell that the screaming was coming from a ditch just a few feet away from the house. He took a minute to make sure he wasn't dreaming or imagining things. But then he started hearing cats and dogs howling and whimpering. So now there was screaming and animals crying all at the same time. He said the screaming was like something he had never experienced before. Eventually, he could make out what the woman was screaming. "Ay, mis hijos," which translates to, "Oh, my children," which La Llorona was known to yell. Terrified by this, he ran to the kitchen and turned the light on. This only made the screaming louder and closer. So naturally, he ran to his parents' room. He shook his mom awake, and of course, as soon as he did this, the screaming started to fade. He asked his mom if she could hear the screaming woman. His mom dismissed him and told him to go back to sleep. But he was certain of what he had heard. And to validate his experience, it happened to him again just a few years later. Okay, so my next story I have here happened to a 14-year-old girl in a small town in Mexico. So when this girl had to use the restroom at night, she would ask her mom to go with her because it was an older home and the restroom was outside. One night, around 3 a.m., she had to go, so she called out for her mom. Her mom wasn't coming or responding, so she yelled louder. At some point, she turned around to see her mom standing at the foot of her bed. She was wearing a white robe, but had a bleak expression on her face, and both of her arms were extended. Suddenly, the girl felt cold and had a huge sense of dread. When she realized she had never seen her mom wear a white robe before, she looked down and saw that her mom's feet were not touching the floor. She then screamed and threw the covers over her head. The girl's mom, wearing something completely different, then ran into the room and found her shaking in the bed. No one believed the girl's story, and everyone told her it was just a dream. But then a few days later, there was a power outage, and the whole family ended up sleeping in the living room together. And again, at 3 a.m., they all heard what they described as undeniable wails of La Llorona down their street. All right, I could go on and on reading all these stories, but I'm going to read just one more story for you. This story takes place in Texas again, and I will also be reading direct quotes from this person. Late at night, I was awakened by something I could only faintly distinguish as sobbing. I laid on the couch with my sheets up under my chin and looked at the clock nearby. It was 3 a.m, on the dot. I could tell whatever was making this sound, it was walking along the road, coming from the canal towards town. The closer it got, the more I began to distinguish this not as a wailing type of crying, but more of what I could only describe as a sad type of crying. I say sad because I could honestly feel myself starting to feel compassion for whatever was crying out there, like if it was my mother or something. The only reason that I was able to resist the urge to go out and try to comfort her right then and there was the extreme cold that had fallen across the room all of a sudden. I forced myself to close my eyes and think happy thoughts, so after a few minutes later, it was gone. I was scared beyond belief, and the more I thought about the feeling of compassion I had just felt, the more creeped out I began to feel. I thought of this for what seemed like forever, when slowly I began to hear the crying off in the distance. This time, it was coming from town and heading towards the canal. It was the same thing as before, and the closer it got, the more clearly I could hear it. A few minutes after I not only heard it, but felt it pass my grandma's house, I was able to muster up enough courage to take a peek out the front window. A dense fog had come over the entire neighborhood, and all I could see was a shadowy figure in a long, flowy dress, with long, raggedy hair, walking towards the canal. And that was the terrifying folklore of La Llorona. What creeps me out about her story is how many people have had experiences actually seeing her and hearing her too. But what's creepier than that is the fact that she has the power to take form of people you know, and also has control of your emotions and the way you feel. I had heard the tale of La Llorona before, but never have heard of this. If she is real, this makes it so much easier for her to accomplish her goal of taking children with her to the water. I hope you all like this story. It is a little different from the first 2 stories I did, which is great. I really want to cover every single type of spooky thing out there. So, just a reminder, my email is whatsyourfavoritescarystory@gmail.com, and that is where you can send any and all ideas you have for me to talk about on this podcast. And please tell me any personal experiences you have with these topics. They will be included in the episodes. Also, be sure to give my Instagram a follow. That too is at whatsyourfavoritescarystory. All right, you guys, I hope these first 3 episodes have gotten you interested and wanting to come back each week for more. Please, if you've enjoyed what you've heard so far, go ahead and leave a review and also tell your friends. I would so greatly appreciate it. Okay, I will talk to you all next week. Stay spooky.